Well, we are very fortunate to be joined in the studio today by the new boss here at SEIA, Tim Pawlenty. We're really excited to have Tim not only here on Good Energy, but with SEIA as a whole. So we just wanted to introduce you to the Good Energy audience and our industry as a whole. So thanks for being here. Would love to just start by a little bit of background on you and sort of what brought you to where you are today, and just a little bit of your personal story.
Well, first of all, it's good to be in the Good Energy podcast studio. I didn't realize we had this on-prem, and I found this the other day, and I thought, this is where Colin probably naps during the afternoon. And I now have found out.
Yeah,
Colin,
it has another purpose.
That's
yeah.
another purpose. Now, it's great to be here. It's great to be on the podcast. Thanks for inviting me, and really excited about taking over the role as CEO of SEIA and to have a chance to work with both of you as well.
Tell us a little bit about your story. What your elevator pitch is about who you are and where you came from.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Minnesota, but I grew up in a first-ring suburb called South St. Paul. It's bumps right up against the boundary of St. Paul. It's a very old suburb by suburban standards, and it's known for historically being the home of the world's largest stockyards and meatpacking plants. So if you can imagine in your mind's eye, maybe you can't, but maybe your listeners can't either. But there in the day there were these massive, like 4, 5, 6, 7-story buildings, as very large buildings and animal pens, livestock pens, and slaughterhouses that would support meat processing and the production of meat proteins in the U.S. And it was a big, smelly, raucous place, and much of the town's economy was dependent upon those facilities and the employment that went with them. And so I grew up in a town that had a proud meatpacking heritage. Yeah. And of course, that industry, for a variety of reasons, collapsed, at least in the form that I just described. And so it was just economically devastating to my town. Mm-hmm. I was the youngest of 5. I was the first in my family to be able to go to college and complete. But a lot of unemployment, economic dislocation in and around my neighborhood and my town, in those days. My dad, for much of his life, was a truck driver. Later in life, he got promoted to dispatcher, that we were all very proud of, because then he could stay in the office and dispatch trucks without having to drive all the time. My mom was mostly a homemaker, although worked a little outside the home. And all my brothers and sisters worked in sort of, I'd say, union labor positions for the most part. My sister was a one-on-one special ed aide. My brother worked in an oil refinery. My other brother worked as a lifelong grocery store, clerk, basically, in a produce department. I worked in the produce department for a long time. So it's a labor background, and it's sort of a blue collar background. And I loved my upbringing. I loved my neighborhood. I loved my family. But those circumstances were challenging, and something that, you don't forget, even as a person now who's done some other things. We're all part of a product of where we came from and how we were raised. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the environment, the circumstances, the chapter that sort of helped form me.
And you've talked about your sort of personal passion and love for public policy. And, we'll talk about your sort of career in government. But what was it about that sort of upbringing and what you went through and experienced that drew you to policy and to governance?
Yeah, well, my mom died when I was in 10th grade. She had ovarian cancer and died pretty suddenly. My dad got laid off not too long after that for a while. And so as a high school student, I'm like, wow, I better really get my butt in gear if I'm going to have a job or find a pathway forward. And I pretty much realized early on, education is the way forward if I'm going to, pull myself out of this situation. And so I took education very seriously, but I wanted to be a dentist. And the reason I wanted to be a dentist is our dentist, Dr. Vogel in South St. Paul, had a very fancy car parked in his reserved parking spot. And it was a Buick Riviera with a sweep, kind of a sports car by the then standards. And as I'd walk in and out of his office every 6 months for a dental cleaning or some other dental problem, I thought, wow, this is the ticket to success. Mm-hmm. You're going to be a dentist. So I decided I was going to go to the University of Minnesota and be pre-dentistry. And then I got into organic and inorganic chemistry and thought, I suck at this. And so I'm going to have to do something else. And long story short, I went into political science, fell in love with sort of the idea of policy and law and how to work and operate in the intersection of public policy to try to solve problems, because I thought it was interesting, but I also thought it was meaningful. Mm-hmm. And that sort of spawned a career that followed.
So I'm glad you raised that, because now that you're at SEIA, I think our audience is really interested in learning what what drew you to the renewable energy industry after your long and decorated career as a former governor of Minnesota and a state legislator? Tell us a little bit about why the renewable energy industry and our advocacy here has been attractive to you.
Well, for a whole bunch of reasons. But first of all, it helps solve a big public policy challenge, and one of them meets one of America's biggest needs, which is more energy, and in this case, more clean energy. And so if you stack rank the things that could add the most value to America, could be most helpful to people, to our fellow citizens, one thing, of course, is education. Another is healthcare. But not too far down the list is Americans, all of us, our families, us individually, our employers, they all need more energy, and we need it to be affordable, and increasingly we need it to be clean. So back when I was governor, all of those things sort of converged in another moment in time to say we need a better way forward to supplement America's energy policy discussion. We need more energy, but we also want it to be cleaner energy and more available energy. And so I launched as governor then a nation-leading initiative for renewable energy, which featured, among other things, trying to get 25% of our energy from renewable sources by the year 2025, which by today's standards is kind of modest, but it directionally gave the discussion and the development of these technologies, including solar, a nice nudge along. And I also consider myself a conservationist. I like proposals and ideas and initiatives that help maintain a clean environment or help to keep it clean or make it cleaner. So all of those things were very appealing to me. And it really started back when I was governor with that initiative that I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you think, before we move on, what do you think is the most beneficial to your current role as the president and CEO of SEIA, taken from your executive experience running the state of Minnesota?
Well, when you run things, you develop some enterprise management experience and skills. So SEIA isn't the world's biggest organization, but it's sizable. We have people and things and systems, and so being able to lead has a lot of components to it. But one of which is you got to cast a vision, you got to be able to manage, you got to be able to inspire, but you also got to be able to execute against identified goals. And so I bring some enterprise management and leadership experience to the job. But I think importantly, there's on the policy side, lots of lessons I've learned along the way. But one of the most profoundly important lessons is if you want something to be durable and last in politics, it has to be done as to the fullest extent possible on a bipartisan basis. Sometimes that's just not possible. But when it is, it dramatically increases the likelihood that that policy initiative is going to stick around a while. And again, an example of that is when I passed the renewable energy provisions and initiatives in Minnesota, it was truly bipartisan. And we had people all across the political spectrum supporting it. And to this day, not only do those standards still exist, but they've been built upon in my home state.
Mm-hmm. So, if you accept that premise, which I think most do, that what's durable and lasting is that which, the majority of people can really get behind, what do you think our strongest messages are to sort of bring the full complement of policymakers here in DC or around the country on board with that vision, and sort of how do we continue to expand the work of sort of making solar a nonpartisan or a bipartisan issue?
That's a great question, Colin. And I think when you think about energy and America's energy needs right now, solar is the answer to all of it, or at least a big part of the answer to all of it. So we need more energy. Well, guess which form of energy is the quickest to deploy from zero to being able to be used in less than 2 years in many cases? Solar, quick to deploy. When in an era when most people, including individuals, families, businesses, are all concerned about affordability, guess what third-party sources are saying about what's the most affordable or cost-effective form of new energy coming on the grid? It's solar. Mm-hmm. Want to talk about reliability? People used to criticize solar for not being available when the sun doesn't shine. Well, now we have storage, i.e. battery capacity that is at industrial scale that has taken away most of those reliability concerns. And then regardless of where you are on the very environmental issues, it's clean. Who's against clean? You could be, far right, far left, something in between. I don't know anybody who's against clean. So regardless of which
You don't
part
know anybody that who's against clean?
I don't know anybody. Well, not anybody who's, thinking clearly.
Yeah, people don't know that this isn't actually the first time that you've been a champion of renewable energy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I like fact-based arguments. I used to be a lawyer, and so part of being a lawyer is you have to go out and collect a bunch of information, distill it down to something that's brief and you can summarize and then use it to persuade a jury or a judge that you've got a good case. But in the end, it's kind of based on real evidence that passes real tests. And I think one of the opportunities for this industry is we have really good facts. We just need the policymakers to catch up to the facts. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about affordability, when you talk about reliability, when you talk about quick to deploy and clean, we win. But unfortunately, we have not been as successful as we could be or should be convincing policymakers that that's worth investing some of their policy capital into. There's been some great successes. Some of those successes have been taken away. Hopefully more will come in the future. But it's I think making a good case starts with, do you have good facts? We do. And now we need to make sure we also answer the question, is it, in the eyes of everybody on either side of the aisle, something that they can politically support or at least tolerate? And we've got some work to do in that regard. You're
a month into the job, more or less. To say that you've been drinking from the fire hose, I'm sure, is a vast understatement. What's been surprising to you? What have you sort of picked up on in your weeks here that you might not have known before, or that sort of jumps out to you as you're reflecting back?
Well, I think one of the things that really has been re-emphasized for me is just on the affordability issue, how well solar performs. And this is not just, some industry person talking about it. If you look at incredible third-party sources, like there's a pretty well-known investment bank called Lazard that puts out an annual or semi-annual report on energy affordability, and they ranked solar and storage as the most cost-effective option there is going forward. And I was also surprised by how much of the new energy going onto the grid is supplied by solar. I mean, America would be in deep, shit without solar. Because in a recent quarter, 91% of all the new energy that went on the grid was from solar. Last year, calendar year 2025, 79% or so of all the new energy going on the grid was solar. You go back another year, maybe not quite so high, but still very high. And if you look at the government agency, the Energy Information Agency, mm-hmm. They're talking about solar being over 50% or 50% of the new energy going forward as far as the eye can see, like out to 2050. Mm-hmm. And so, people should be looking at solar and saying, thank you for saving our bacon in terms of meeting new energy needs, not, kicking us in the shins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
And that was a surprise. I knew that solar was contributing a lot. I didn't realize it was contributing at that extreme levels.
So you've got the floor here. Right? Where do we go from here as an industry when the path forward is so clear to us because we know what's possible with renewable energy? But in this political environment, what is our next step in order to convince the folks in Washington and around the country that this is the common sense, practical way to look at our energy generation in the future?
Well, I jokingly say, and I want to qualify this by saying jokingly, that we sit in a town, Washington, D.C., where it's rare for any meeting to begin with the question, what's the right thing to do? I think the right thing to do is to advance solar and make it an even bigger part of America's energy future for all the reasons we've been discussing. But in this town and in state capitals across the country, we also have to make it the right politically thing for policymakers to choose. And we now have allowed, not we, but the politicians and the people that empower them have polarized energy policy in a way that has not been helpful. I think we to the extent we can bring it back to a bipartisan approach, and I'll be very blunt, in my party, the Republican Party, there's lots of people who support solar for a variety of reasons in the Democratic Party. But in the Republican Party, we need to make it okay again to be conservative and be for solar, not because some organization is persuading you, but because it's a good idea on the facts that you've learned yourself. And we've got to bring that to the table and also bring some sort of political encouragement to the table for those folks who are willing to step in and be leaders in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we'll sort of close back to the beginning of where we started, of sort of your history and your younger self. What are you sort of looking back on through your long career, and having learned through these experiences, including the one that you're in here at SEIA? Like if you could sort of, grab a beer with your younger self, what would you tell him, and what would your advice be?
Well, if I could grab a beer with my younger self, I'd start with stop drinking after two beers, because when I was younger, I did have too many beers, but sometimes not at the problem level. But
sure.
Sure, we'll go with that. But with that background I described earlier, I think it's important for young people to make sure that their courage exceeds their fear. I mean, you think about a young person in today's world with all the challenges coming at them with social media, AI, trying to guess what career is the right path for you, and you don't know how this is all going to play forward. You may or may not have access to resources. You can be not frozen, but you can certainly be overly worried, and that's understandable. But you also have to develop enough fortitude and courage to make sure you don't miss opportunities and goals and dreams that you might have. We got to make sure your courage exceeds your fears, and as the old song goes, you got to chase your own dreams because the dreams don't chase you back.
That's a good message to end on, and we're really excited to have you here and sort of leading the charge on the next chapter of SEIA, and looking forward to what we can all do together.
Thanks for having me, and great to be in the studio.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to see that this podcast is actually a podcast because I see this on your calendars all the time, and I was wondering if you're actually doing it. And now I see you are.
Something productive in here.
I see you are.